What do we actually mean by the making of constitution? When we refer to the making of the constitution, we are essentially talking about the historical and political process through which India designed its governing framework. The constitution did not emerge as a ready-made legal document. It evolved through debates, deliberation, and negotiation within the Constituent Assembly. This distinction is important because it frames the constitution as a product of reasoning rather than imposition. So, why was there a demand for constituent assembly in the first place? The demand for the constituent assembly reflects a deeper democratic principle. The constitution must derive legitimacy from the people. Initially, nationalist demands were centered around administrative reforms. However, as the freedom movement matured, the emphasis gradually shifted towards self governance and sovereign statehood. The core idea became that India must consciously design its governance structure rather than merely inherit colonial institutions. So, how was the Constituent Assembly formed? The Constituent Assembly was formed under the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. Its composition was indirect rather than based on universal adult franchise. Members were elected by provincial legislative assemblies, and representation was structured across provinces and princely states. Despite not being directly elected by the entire population, the assembly derived legitimacy through broad representation and historical mandate. So, why was unique? What was unique about the composition of this assembly? Unlike a mass political body, the Constituent Assembly largely consisted of legal experts, administrators, scholars, and political leaders. This ensured that deliberations were intellectually driven rather than dominated by rhetorical politics. Constitution making requires precision, structural foresight, and institutional balance, qualities better served by expert led discussions. So, how did the assembly manage the complexity of the constitution making? Given the enormous complexity involved, the assembly relied heavily on a committee system. Instead of drafting everything in plenary sessions, responsibilities were divided among the specialized committees. Different committees focused on different areas such as fundamental rights, union structure, provincial governance, and drafting. This divisions reflects administrative rationality and structured deliberation. So, what was the role of the drafting committee? Among all the committees, the drafting committee played the most decisive role. Chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, its function was to translate principles and debates into coherent constitutional text. This required legal clarity, conceptual consistency, and structural precision. Ambedkar's contribution lies not only in drafting but in shaping the constitutional architecture. So, what was the significance of the objective resolution? Before detailed drafting began, the Assembly adopted the objective resolution. This served as the philosophical blueprint of the Constitution. It articulated core constitutional values such as sovereignty, democracy, justice, equality, and federalism. The ideas expressed in the resolution later crystallized into preamble. So, why is the time frame of the constitution making important? The constitution took nearly 3 years to complete, specifically 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. This duration signals deliberative seriousness rather than administrative delay. It reflects extensive debates, revisions, and consensus building. Time in this context becomes an indicator of the institutional maturity. So, why distinguish between enactment and enforcement? The constitution was adopted in November 1949 but enforced in January 1950. This gap highlights administrative foresight. Adoption alone is insufficient. State institutions required preparation for transition. The distinction reflects governance pragmatism. So, why did India borrow features from other constitutions? The Indian constitution incorporates elements from multiple constitutional traditions. For example, parliamentary system was adopted from UK. The fundamental rights were adopted from USA. Directive principles was from Ireland. Borrowing reflects pragmatic constitutional engineering rather than conceptual weakness. India synthesized globally tested principles to demo- domi- to suit domestic realities. So, what deeper analytical insight does this chapter offer? At a deeper level, the Constitution represents a negotiated balance across competing forces: unity versus diversity, rights versus order, centralization versus federalism. It is a fundamentally a document of political and institutional compromise. This equilibrium contributes to its long term durability. So, what is the ultimate takeaway from this chapter? The making of this constitution reveals that India's democratic framework was consciously constructed rather than historically accidental. It reflects institutional reasoning, democratic deliberation, structured foresight, and pragmatic adaptation. Most importantly, the constitution functions as a living governance framework rather than static law. So that's the conceptual summary of the making of the Indian Constitution.